Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of the Daily Friend Show. I'm your host, Nicholas Lorimer, and today I'm joined for veterans of the podcast this week because they've been covering for my sickness. Of course, we have Sara gone. Sara, how are you? And thank you again for hosting.
No, well, thanks. I'm not sure your sickness was a bigger problem as load shedding.
Yeah, load shedding has not been great either. And of course, we're also joined today by Mr. Terence Corrigan. Terence, how are you doing, sir?
Hey, Nicholas, just cold.
Yeah, no, it is. This is like the truly, I mean, the phrase winter of our discontent is like constantly thrown around, but man, it really feels like that right now. Stage 6 load shedding, it's cold, it's just a bit miserable. And, you know, the crimes of load shedding are great and many and varied and terrible. But there's a new one to add to the list, and that is that it has robbed us today, or at least contributed to robbing us today, of Mr. Becky Motlobo, who Terence has stepped in to replace very graciously. But Becky is unfortunately going to be leaving the Daily Friend Show and the IRR and the CRA. He's going to be getting new exciting work, doing financial analysis. He will occasionally still be writing for the Daily Friend, as far as I understand. But we're going to miss him. And yeah, he's been great to work with, and he's been also great to have on the show. So I'm very sad to miss Becky, and I'm sad that he couldn't be here today for what would have been his last appearance on the show. But he did tell me to tell everyone listening that he loves you all, and he reads all the comments, good and bad. And yeah, he's going to miss you guys as well. So salute to Becky. He's a brave, clever soldier in the revolution that we struggle in. And I'm very sad to see him going off to greener pastures.
No, miss him.
Yes, indeed we will. Anyway, so let's get started with our first story today. And this is some comments that were made by former Public Protector Thuli Madonsela. And she says that South Africa should consider amnesty for small players in the Zondo and state capture corruption scandals. That basically anyone who played a small but significant role should be granted amnesty as part of efforts to take down the bigger fish. She told ENCA that amnesty would not be granted to the big guys, but rather to small but significant players. She said, quote, "The only way you can cut the tentacles of the monster that is corruption is to make sure that everyone who has been involved in the syndicate is accounted for, and those who are small role players are given some form of amnesty. I'm not asking for amnesty for the big guys. I'm asking for amnesty for the finance clerk, the HR clerk, the supply chain management managers, the ordinary foot soldiers. I don't think we will lose much if we give amnesty to the foot soldiers of corruption." So this is an interesting question, and it follows a kind of a precedent, I think, that often happens in crime, especially when you have a sort of like racketeering, organized crime thing, where you give amnesty to the sort of middle and lower players in exchange for them helping to bust the big guys. But corruption is such a sort of systemic problem that and so few people have been properly prosecuted for it. I am a little bit skeptical of the idea of handing out amnesties, especially when the prosecutions haven't even come down the chain yet for anyone, really. Sara, what do you make of the former public protector's argument here?
It's not a bad idea, but it's predicated on a number of things happening. And that is, firstly, you do actually have to have a case against said small players, so that the threat of going to jail is mitigated by the promise of not going to jail if you rat on the top guys. However, this is South Africa, and I'd imagine for a lot of people they wouldn't rat just because they'd be afraid that they won't lose their freedom, they'll lose their lives. We have a habit of dealing with things in a rather final and brutal manner. But you definitely have to have gone down that evidence gathering route before you can offer essentially a plea deal, or sort of no time for the big guys. And I think the problem you're going to find is, I think the best we can hope for is that certainly you want to see the big guys go. There's not a particular satisfaction in the small guys, although as Matthew says, they can first pay back the money. Well, that doesn't stop the SIU going after them independently. But I think we are so there is just so much at play, and we are so far away from prosecutions that I'm not even sure if it's worth talking about until we get to the point where it's worth debating.
Terence, what do you make of it? I guess part of the question here is, how do you actually fix the culture of systemic corruption? Do you focus on the people at the top and hope that it sort of flows down, or do you try to kind of do a comprehensive shaking up of the whole system?
What is this? What's the saying? A fish rots from the head.
Right. That comes up all the time in South African discourse on corruption.
Look, I think that the intuitive way a lot of South Africans see it is that you're much more likely to go to prison because you pilfered a bit from the municipal funds and the petty cash box than you are if you're the procurement officer who's taking huge kickbacks. Ultimately, though, I think the latter is worse and is more damaging than the former. Technically, this was the model that we kind of went on in the with the Truth Commission in the 1990s. That, though, I mean, there were big structural issues. Evidence was served in at with lower credibility than an affidavit, for instance. You had a lot of attention being given to the proceedings in the Human Rights Violations Committee, very little on the Amnesty Committee, which was held to a higher standard. And then there were effectively no prosecutions after it anyway. So, I think that basically said, it was just worth waiting out. My sense is the best is it the way that has to work. If you have a criminal case to answer, yes, there can be an offer of amnesty in exchange for assisting in prosecutions, for full and useful disclosure. But I also think that we need to on the cultural aspect. Here's something else. I do hope that there's not a rash of sort of opinion pieces coming out about how brave this guy is. Let's also remember that XYZ, were happy to, maybe they were just taking their 5,000 rand in exchange for using their official stamp. But and maybe we can see our way clear to forgiving that in the legal sense. But I do think that there is something that if you want to change the culture, there is something about retaining a moral sanction over that. So this is basically how you save your skin, not how you become a hero of the South African people.
Right. I completely agree with that last point there. I think that one of the things that concerns me a little bit about what Madonsela is saying here is that it really does feel like this is kind of just letting things go, and we're isolating, we're ignoring the culture and isolating the problem to just these people. It's this kind of this analysis of South Africa that says that the problem is Zuma and the Guptas, and that's all. And if we just get rid of them, then things are sorted. And that's not the problem.
Look, if I may just add something to that, reading President Ramaphosa's letter to the country, you could come away with this view that there was this clique of lizard men, or who were meeting in the Illuminati chapel in downtown Hillbrow to sort of capture the state. But we've now written in Ramaphosa himself has a case to answer. Actually read the report. On Friday, Gwede Mantashe was saying, "Oh no, this is everyone deploys and cadre deployment's fine, and look at all the wonderful things it's done." In fact, Ramaphosa at the Zondo Commission said Ramaphosa adds an cadre deployment adds an extra layer of accountability. So if things are bad now, just wait until the cadre deployment committee is no longer exercising its oversight. I mean, seriously, are we going to take this thing seriously? actually turn away. Regular readers or regular listeners will know that I'm a Roman Catholic. Now, here's an interesting thing: people often mistake the rite of confession. Confession isn't I go and say what I did, and the priest is okay, everything's fine. You can be assigned a penance. Like, for instance, if I go and tell my priest that I murdered someone, he may say, "Well, I will forgive you when you report yourself to the police and give yourself up, when you have made some sort of amends." It's not just a case of saying, "Ooh, I did something bad, my bad." He says, "All right, just shrug it off." You don't get to shrug some of this stuff off.
Sara, final thoughts?
Yeah, I'd like to suggest, and I've done this before, a more mundane way of dealing with a culture at every level, and that is dismissal. And I think the problem is that, particularly in the state, within the state, there's a tendency to run disciplinary hearings not parallel to, which they should be parallel to, criminal proceedings, but they tend to wait for the outcome of criminal proceedings before they embark upon the disciplinary. The disciplinary is the employer's prerogative. It can be held very much more quickly. The onus of proof is much lower, and in this society, to lose your job, it's probably worse than going to jail, because you're not guaranteed a hot meal every day. And I think that is crucial, to know that there are literally millions of people out there who would happily take your job if they could do it. And normally, sort of in the world I grew up in, you commit theft, corruption, whatever you want to call it, you got fired. You have to have a hearing, but that needn't take more than a week to a month, depending on the complexity, and you get fired. And I think that is what's missing in the public sector, is that is the way you change the culture. A, you teach people a lesson and they deserve the firing, and B is you teach to some extent you teach the people who are left behind, but you also very often improve the environment they're in, because they are so pleased to see the back of the crooks, because they've made their lives miserable. So it is so much simpler. I mean, I don't want to underestimate its complexity, but it's so much simpler than concentrating on the criminal route. That happens separately, and the state is responsible for that. So fire them.
I think that is an excellent point, because I think modern politics in general, this isn't just a South African problem, a lot of countries suffer from this. No one wants to ever talk about kind of small systemic changes and things. Everyone wants to always have big dramatic silver bullets that, we'll take down the Guptas and then the whole system will come crumbling down. No, just show up to work and do the thing you should be doing every single day.
And get rid of the guy who isn't.
Right, exactly. And if you do that, actually a lot more things will improve a lot more quickly than if you get rid of some high profile guy. I think, and Terence, you can correct me here, but my impression I get of how China works is they do take down people for corruption, but it doesn't really reduce corruption that much in the overall system, because it's always just an excuse to get rid of some political opponent. And I think that's the risk here, is that everyone who goes down for corruption is just someone who's politically out of favor at the time.
But look, in the Chinese case specifically, though, and I am an inveterate critic of the Chinese Communist Party. They are aware that if corruption gets out of hand, it does start to break their plans. So they are concerned to keep it within limits. But the other thing, and this goes back to the cultural aspect, to be a civil servant in Sinic society, and this goes back thousands of years, was a prestigious job. You got in through an exam. It's very competitive, and that entitled you to a certain degree of social status, and also certain rents that came with it. The phrase is hongbao, red envelope. There's a lot of corruption in that sort of the world, but it's sort of technically illegal. But the idea that you pay someone to expedite your project, but to do it, he will do it legitimately, but it's
right, but he still does it.
That's the point. It's crooked, but not crooked beyond beyond functionality. I'm not recommending that as a solution. I'm simply describing
as a halfway house to a functional state, though. It does sound better than what we currently have.
But there is nothing sort of genetically superior about the Danes or the Norwegians or the Finns or whatever to ourselves. What they do have is a public sector culture where you are paid well and you do your job efficiently, if only within hours. I know of someone who was supposed to be picked up at Copenhagen Airport, and the plane was delayed, and the driver just said, "Right, 4:00, I'm going home. You sort yourself out." But he had the plane arrived on time, he would have been there.
Yes. All right. Let's move on to our next topic. And of course, we've all, I think, been feeling the effects of inflation. This is not just a South African thing, it is a global thing, but it is hitting South Africa in some very nasty ways. So there's been a recent report about this. The latest household affordability index, compiled by the Pietermaritzburg Economic Justice and Dignity Group, says that the average cost of food in the country has gone up by 14% in the last year, or slightly just under 14%. So they do this by looking at 44 supermarkets and 30 butcheries in Johannesburg, Durban, Cape Town, Pietermaritzburg, and Springbok in the Northern Cape. And they found that, unsurprisingly, the price of pretty much everything is going way up. Everything from soaps to meat to food. And really, I think there is increasingly talk now about some kind of repeat of the July riots, if there's, the appropriate spark. I don't know what that would be necessarily, but maybe some kind of political instability, maybe something to do with the ANC elective conference, maybe some scandal that then kind of encourages people to take advantage of the people being out in the streets to kind of go out and riot and that kind of thing. So, Terence, let me start with you. Firstly, I mean, do you think that's a realistic proposition? And secondly, what do you make of inflation and maybe what government should be trying to combat it with?
Once again, going back into the early reaches of my life, I remember reading in one of my dad's Time magazines, this must have been late 80s, a journalist had gone to Cuba and was speaking to someone who said, his father didn't become a communist by reading Marx, but because he saw suffering on the street. And I think, the inability to satisfy your basic physical needs is the first step in radicalization, feeling that there is no incentive, to support the system, and that is why the appeal of populism or just general anarchism or opportunism. So yes, I think that we are probably not far from a repeat of that. Remember, you've got the ANC's conference later. I'm sure that there are some people there who believe that a suitable rocking of the boat would be in their political interests. And after the Zondo Commission has come out, there could be some people whose at least theoretically, their future life chances may not be assured. What was the whole Bell Pottinger white monopoly capital thing about? It was about saying, it's not the crooks who are stealing, it's these other guys. That's who you should really really watch out for. And also remember, I mean, we're all seeing the effects of inflation, but in South African terms, we're all fortunate. Someone who has to spend 30, 40, 50% of the income of food, you raise the price of a sack of maize meal by a few rand, and that really hits you. Transport, getting into a taxi and finding that you have to pay an extra, 2 rand for your fare. That's big money.
So what's interesting, of course, this report points out that there are a lot of international factors driving inflation. Pretty much every country in the world is experiencing some kind of inflation, I think, right now. But it does also point out that one of the contributors to inflation in South Africa are things like disruptions to our major transport routes, particularly between Gauteng and Durban, so the N3. Sara, what do you make of all this?
I think, and I can't come to it from a sort of steeped in the brilliance of economics that Becky could have offered us, but when you've got inflation riding, food inflation riding at more than 14%, and overall inflation half that or less, it's false. I mean, it's the effect on the ground that's going to matter. So you've got this huge price increase in the price of food, and as far as I know, the taxi fees are, what you pay to take a ride is going to go up by R5 in July, and the combination, excuse me, the combination of the two is going to be, well, it just sort of adds to the catastrophe. Whether people will actually rise up or whether they become literally too impoverished to rise up is another thing that we'll probably have to wait and see. But all it's going to do is it's going to put so much pressure on people that whatever was pressurizing people, whatever the government wasn't doing, wasn't providing, didn't think about or didn't care about, is going to just become exacerbated. So the fear of this sort of thing happening, as happened in July last year, is very, very real. And given we've talked about the sort of the construction mafias on occasion, and the various groupings that will literally hijack trucks and stop them from running for real or nefarious reasons, whatever they may be, it's all going to sort of just spill over. And I think it's if we get through the next couple of years, this is the death knell for the ANC, because it's like trying to put a finger in the dike, to use an old metaphor. The system is just leaking everywhere, and there is no way a party as corrupt as the ANC and a party which performs so badly can grab hold of these increasing prices, this increase in food, but as a consequence of prices, that ratchet effect. We've got to expect social unrest, and of course with the with our police authorities and similar. I'm not sure what they're going to do about it. I don't know if their police intelligence has improved any, but over 14% increase in food with an increase in unemployment. Wow, that's a lot to deal with.
I think on the point of the sort of vulnerability of the N3, because it is a sort of major route, it's the biggest city's connection to, well, not just the biggest city, the biggest urban area's connection to, it's the country's biggest port. I think that it is a priority for government, and it should already be a priority for this government, but even for future governments after 2024, 2029, that securing the flow of goods along that route is going to be actually really important for avoiding some really nasty stuff, particularly because the country is probably going to have quite a lot of instability politically, I think, in the next couple of years. I can very much see the potential for someone to hold the country hostage by blocking that route for a long time.
Well, look, just in terms of ramping up costs, take political instability out of it. The fact is that our rail system hasn't been maintained, so everything has to go by road. We could knock off a lot of the we could knock really some of the logistics costs by having a functioning rail system. Postage, anybody trying to run a kind of mail order or remote business has to go through a courier. That is a great deal more expensive. The whole point of a post office is not so much to deliver to your major centers where couriers can handle that probably more efficiently, but it's for those outlying places. And that it really makes me tear my hair out when people say, "Oh, well, you're worried about your grandmother's Christmas card." No, this is about a whole facet of commerce that is undermined.
Yeah, it's for people who can't afford couriers that really rely on the post office or don't have regular access to computers. Okay, let's move on to our last story, and this is a story from the Sowetan. It's focusing on a report by a group of NGOs, civics organizations, Action Aid and Makuna, I think, are the two groups. And they do what they call social audits on areas to see the effect of sort of social upliftment programs on communities. So anyone who knows anything about mining in South Africa will know that the government requires a mine to provide a lot of stuff for the local community. You know, you're supposed to have training centers, and maybe you're supposed to help build houses, and you're supposed to sort of give back in return for firstly getting the mining license, and secondly for possibly damaging the environment a bit in the area. So according to this report in the Sowetan, residents of Kutsong in Cartonville believe that the mining operations around where they live have not really helped them much. There's a big Harmony gold mine there, which according to the NGOs has failed to fulfill the promises it made for sort of social upliftment in the area. Some locals said unemployment rate here is high and youth are involved in criminal activity. Living in a place like this is painful. There is gold being mined here, but the lives of residents are not improving. Mines have brought us nothing but stress. Most people here feel hopeless. There were several projects, including a housing development, a farm project, a local training center that were all promised by the company. The housing project wasn't done, apparently due to some rezoning issues with the municipality. And the other ones were set up, but they don't seem to have had much of effect on the community, which I think doesn't surprise us particularly. The company itself pointed out that it had given significant amounts of money to various projects that they promised to do, but that it's not our fault if these don't solve poverty in the community. But it's really just an unhappy situation because you have very poor people living next to a mine, and they feel like they're just really not getting anything out of it, whereas they should be feeling like this is the lifeblood of their community. The NGOs put the blame very much at the feet of the company. They said mining companies do not leave projects with long-lasting benefits of communities, and the quality of life in mining communities is not very high. So, Sara, let me start with you. What do you make of all this? How to make mining work for sort of ordinary people is, I think, kind of difficult. But I feel like, really going after the companies for not building a school or something is kind of missing the point here.
Yeah, I'm going to be a little skeptical about this because I know there are mining houses that have pumped billions into the communities around them. But the very fact that there are communities around mines doesn't necessarily mean that they have not benefited from the mines. There will obviously be an element of employment. There will be the small industry around it. And then, of course, there's a question of why should, I'm speaking broadly rather than specifically, but really, why should communities benefit from mines unless something is unless there's a trade-off which they deserve to be compensated for? And of course, I think it's more a case of, the companies undertake to do these things for the communities because the government has granted them the license, and therein lies probably the biggest problem. Because what the government does do is abdicate virtually all responsibility for these communities, and it's a type of corruption in itself, because it says you provide for the communities, and usually it's actually not that easy to provide, because a lot of what you may provide may not be suitable. The nature of the community is not suitable. The breakdown of young people, the education they've had, you can't just sort of go and provide. It isn't that easy. That is what the government is supposed to do, and it generally doesn't, and very often it doesn't do at the local level in particular. And I mean, there have been dreadful stories over the years about what the areas around Rustenburg have not seen from the government. So, most of the instances I'm aware of mining companies doing something is because the people who work for them do live in nearby communities, and they work on the basis that if they can do something, what's good for the community will be good for their staff, and vice versa. And that makes a certain amount of sense. That's pragmatic. But when you've got mining companies having to provide electricity, water, sewerage, etc., then you know that it's kind of, we'll give you the mining license, which you've spent the last 10 years trying to get, and you'll provide the services that we are supposed to provide. So I'm very cynical, and I'm also a bit concerned. I mean, I realize people are in desperate situation at present, but I'm also concerned about we're a community, we'll settle, the mine is here. they must give us something. Life, it's just largely not going to work that way. It's an individual mind situation.
My personal experience of this kind of thing, and I know a little bit about it, is that often the politicians very explicitly create that expectation amongst people.
Exactly.
This is briefly, Terence, your thoughts on this issue.
Well, look, I think that what you're dealing with there is fundamentally a sort of governance problem. Mining companies, businesses, or whatever, they want to make a profit, and they shouldn't have to apologize for that. Yeah, mining is a business with some downsides, environmental degradation or whatever, and that needs to be kept in check. And supposedly our mining legislation is meant to enforce that. But I think what you end up getting is a place a situation which virtually all government functions have ground to a halt. There is clawing poverty, and what a commercial operation can do is provide some sort of top up to that. You're not, so you put an IT hub or a training center. Well, there's so many young people you can bring in.
Right, and if kids have terrible education coming through the high school system, it doesn't matter. They're not going to be able to get a job, no matter how well they can do something on the IT system.
Yeah, look. Also, there's a kind of almost philosophical argument you could have about this. These minerals are sort of a bounty of nature, and they are they meant to benefit a particular community or the country as a whole? Because the taxes that come off that are collected by the national government and are then plowed to a large extent into things like social grants. I imagine that if you went to a society, to a more developed society with a big mining sector like Australia and Canada, you would see mining communities exist around the mine to extract, but there are other opportunities because just healthier economies. The actual benefit is understood to be across the state or across across the country, but what you don't have is the scale of immediate deprivation, and the sense that someone should be doing something.
Definitely.
And I must say I can't blame those communities living in those conditions.
Very much so. All right, that's all the time we have for today. So thank you very much for listening. We will see you next week on the Daily Fringe Show. Have a great one, everyone. Cheers.